construction of the M77. What's the future of direct action?
Three men walked free because the jury foreman said not proven after the jury agreed they were guilty.
I'm Jane Frankie. Tonight, Frontline speaks to a member of that jury and asks, how did the mistake happen?
Pollok, Coventry, Brightlingsea. Around the country, people are taking to the streets to protest. Disillusioned with democracy, I'm Shelley Joffrey. I'll be examining why so many are choosing to bypass the ballot box.
Enshrined in our legal system for centuries, the right to have guilt or innocence decided by our peers. 15 citizens whose deliberations are by law secret, and who, because of their random selection, are supposed to reflect society itself. Trial by jury, said Lord Devlin, is the lamp that shows that freedom lives.
But just a few weeks ago, here at the High Court in Glasgow, there was an extraordinary mistake involving a jury. A mistake which resulted in 3 men the jury believed were guilty of serious assault being given not proven verdicts and walking free. Not only a case of justice not being done, but not being seen to be done either. And it's raised serious questions about the jury system.
At the 9-day trial, 4 men stood accused of punching their victim, hitting him with a baton, repeatedly stabbing and attempting to murder him. The jury agreed 1 man was not guilty, that the attempted murder charge for the other 3 was not proven, but that they were guilty of serious assault. It all went very wrong. Now, despite the law which gags jurors, 1 speaks out.
Our foreman responded not proven to 3 of the individuals and not guilty to the 4th individual. This was not what we'd actually agreed in the jury room.
Was it repeated back for him?
Once the response from the jury had been given to the clerk then went back to the jury foreman and asked him to reiterate what he'd just said. And the jury foreman responded exactly as he'd done previously.
What was the reaction on the jury to this? I mean, what did you feel?
I've personally reacted as soon as he mentioned the first person as responding not proven, as this was not what had been agreed on. And then he responded to the second individual. I could see no obvious reaction from any other jury member. I was feeling a bit confused, looking about trying to get someone's attention, but no, not any further than that. It was all over in a matter of minutes. The second responses were all over. The clerk responded to the judge asked the individuals then to stand up and told them they were free to go, and that was it.
But back in the jury room, they told the clerk of the court about the mistake. He reported it to the judge. His decision, the not proven verdict, stands.
There was a lot of confusion and anger by the jury members. Then some people were visibly upset by what had happened, and some anger and some tears by individuals.
It was here in Tormore Street in Govan that the attack took place in December 1993. One of the men who walked free from the trial walks about freely here too. His victim is too frightened to show his face.
I was knocked to the ground by one of them. They'd caught up with me by then, and that is really all I remember, sort of trying to constantly get myself up because I didn't feel myself being punched or kicked. That's what I thought. Well, I thought, well, I'm on the ground. Like my brain was telling me that at the time. So it was when I got up, I was trying to turn round because I didn't know what was happening to me. I'd never been stabbed before. So.
And you had been stabbed by this time then?
They were in the process of stabbing me. It was then I realised there was blood pouring from me, and it was at that time I realised, God, I've been stabbed. And I put my hand into my jacket and I just felt the heat.
Chris Nugent gave evidence at the trial. It wasn't until 4 days after it finished that he read in a Sunday newspaper about the jury's mistake.
I had phoned the court on the Tuesday and I was just told, like, not proven, just get on with it, and that's how I took it. They got a not proven, life goes on, and that is how I was going to deal with it. And to find out through a tabloid newspaper, I think, is the biggest insult you can give somebody that went through what I did go through.
Chris Nugent and his lawyer are now seeking a private prosecution, meaning the 3 men would be tried twice for the same crime, said to be impossible.
That's a bit of a myth that no one can be tried twice for the same crime. It is possible to be tried twice. And on taking counsel's advice, we think this is the best way to go ahead. Our problem is that this is unique. There has never been a situation like this. So there's no precedent that we can rely on, but we do believe that this is the correct course of action.
At the High Court in February, somehow, somewhere between the jury room and the courtroom, 9 days of hard deliberation were shattered.
There was a part of their verdict which was to read as not proven, and that was to the serious part of the charge. And
The attempted murder.
it was, yes. And in the situation of going into court and standing up in front of everyone, my reaction was that the person was very nervous and just answered the wrong side, the wrong way around regarding the verdicts. That was my personal opinion of it.
Few people are excluded from being called for jury duty. Nearly all of us can find ourselves summoned at any time. It's the luck of the draw. No special knowledge asked for, no qualifications needed.
One has been in a situation where juries are completely befuddled and muddled about what verdict they should be bringing back, and what they've, between deciding it in the jury room and the foreman standing up and telling the court what it is, there often is confusion. They're not experts in the law. They've probably never been in a court before. They go into the jury room with some brief instructions from the sheriff or the judge, and they're expected to come back with a perfect package. Now, very often they do, and it's simple enough. They all decide it's unanimous guilty or unanimous acquittal. But if it's not, if it's more complicated than that, particularly if there are 4 or 5 charges or 2 or 3 accused persons or a combination of both, then they have got to construct a plan of campaign which takes into account all the charges and all the accused. That can be a very sore task for people who have never been in a court before and have never been asked to do that kind of work.
And if the jury's plan of campaign is announced incorrectly, it's supposed to fall to the other members to point out their foreman's mistake.
You can imagine what it's like for an ordinary member of the public, again, who's never been in a court before. To them, it's like church almost. I mean, the court, the High Court particularly, has got a judge in the red robes and the wig, and there's a clerk of court fully made up in the regalia. There are lawyers on both sides. There's the public. It is terrifying. Now, to stand up in the middle of that, say, excuse me, there's been a wee mistake, is tantamount to standing up in the middle of a church service and saying, well, I'm sorry, Reverend, but you're saying the wrong prayer, or you're getting the Our Father wrong, or something like that. It just is very difficult to do.
Jury stories, some of them surely apocryphal, are part of court legend. But behind the amusement and behind the formidable facade of Parliament Square, the centre of Scotland's judicial system, there's serious belief that the accused should be judged by their peers, and firm agreement with the saying that juries are the touchstone of common sense.
It's always the jury who get the blame in this sort of situation where something appears to have gone wrong. Then the automatic reaction in the press is juries make a mistake again. All these dunderheads who sit on juries don't know what to do. This is terrible. In fact, I think that it's wrong to blame the jury entirely in a situation like that, because they are being brought into a foreign environment to them, and it is the lawyer who has to explain to them, the judge and the court officials have to explain to them what the procedures are and how they operate. And I don't see why the jury should get the blame in that situation rather than the lawyers and the officials for failing to give full and clear explanations.
Those full and clear explanations, it's been suggested, could be given to the jury in the jury room. Legal advice on hand.
It would be much better to have somebody in the jury room, a moderator is the word I've used before, or a clerk, who's not part of the jury, but is legally qualified and can see where things are going wrong or can answer technical questions on the law. I went to university for 3 years and did 2 years apprenticeship after that, and I've been 13 years or something after that in practice. And I have to go and look at the books regularly to see what the law is on a particular matter. A jury that gets a little lecture from the sheriff or the judge, which might last a minute or 15 minutes, really are not equipped to make a decision on a complex case.
I think that having someone there to tell them about the law, in addition to the judge in the court telling them about the law, is a recipe for complete disaster. Then you have not one person in charge of the law and explaining it to the jury. You have someone else whose interpretation may not necessarily be the same, who is giving his advice in private to the jury and out with the presence of the accused, which is certainly goes against one of the cardinal principles of our system, that the trial must take place in the presence of the accused. And I think you have a recipe for much greater confusion in the minds of the jury than exists at the moment.
It would have been helpful if someone could have assisted, because once we'd decided what the person was going to be guilty of or not guilty of, whatever the case may be, then how to put that across to the clerk of court was left to our own devices then. We weren't given any advice on that whatsoever, and if some individual could have been there to make it proper and not end up with the situation that happened, yes, I think that would have been beneficial.
Their mistaken verdict was apparently the final straw for many of the jury members at the trial of Chris Nugent's attackers. It came at the end of a fortnight of stress, worry, and in some cases fear of the increasingly busy public gallery. Were they just ordinary members of the public, or were they in some way connected?
I think people could sense that they were related in some way, or knew the accused sitting in the dock. And that was made apparent at a very early stage, because individuals, or women, were, after a few nights, some of the women were actually shouted at.
And these were women members of the jury?
Women members of the jury were shouted at in the street outside by people for a period of time and got visibly upset by this. This then brought a sense of further fear into jury members the next morning, because not everyone was aware of it until the next morning. Sometimes I changed my route of going home at night purely because of what happened in the early stages, and there was a fear factor. It was always in your mind, it just didn't go away.
If the fear is overcrowding and the number of people there, then steps can be taken to limit that. If the fear is their names being read out in court, which at the moment happens, then steps could be taken to prevent that being done and to identify them by a number or some other method so that their identity would not be disclosed at any stage in the proceedings. If the concern is that they run across members of the public or witnesses or other people going to and fro from the court and the jury room, then again steps can easily be taken to deal with that by clearing the passages before the jury move and so on. So there are a number of steps that could be taken to allay the genuine fears which people may have about appearing on a jury.
Chris Nugent's fear is that he'll never see justice done.
I never expected this to happen to me. I don't think anybody expects to be stabbed. So why should somebody that does that to somebody just walk free?
For the juror involved, one trial was enough.
If I could avoid it, I wouldn't go back. The 2 weeks were a stressful 2 weeks. It affected my personal life, and I wouldn't want to go through that again.
protest 90s style, aggressive confrontations between campaigners and the authorities. Whether the cause is road building or the live exportation of veal calves, more and more people are taking direct action. Now the campaign against the M77 has put Glasgow in the spotlight.
These people have travelled from all over Britain to join in today's Scottish Defiance Alliance demonstration. They represent many smaller protest groups like hunt saboteurs, animal rights activists and road protesters. But they're all united in their defiance against the Criminal Justice Bill, which seeks to limit their right to peaceful protest. Some say it represents a growing trend in grassroots political activism.
I come from Oxford. We fought a road campaign there. We won. I've come here to show my support for these wonderful people here and everything they're achieving.
And it's not just road protesters who came to support the Glasgow demonstration. Campaigners against veal crates travelled up from Coventry.
I think people are fed up of leaving it in the hands of politicians who, to be honest, just take the fat salary, the MPs, and do very little, with it. They just sit in Parliament in a debating chamber and think that that's what politics is all about. Politics is about people's ordinary lives, about getting up and standing up for what they believe in and doing something about it.
They could become a major political force, and indeed that has happened in the roads protesting in England. What the economists called the classless protest, bringing together the Blue Ruins ladies of Buckinghamshire with the long-haired youths up the M11. They have together forced the government to substantially change its road building policy.
What has astounded me in Coventry is the mix of people. It's absolutely wonderful to see young and old, middle class and working class unemployed people getting together and standing up for what they believe in.
The protest, which transcends class barriers, is seen as an innovation in direct action across Britain.
It's an unlikely coalition. You have, in some cases, certainly in England, I think it's true in Scotland, people who traditionally would be supporters of the Conservative Party, who would support, if you like, law and order, who would be quite deferential. These are not your archetypal sort of protesters, or what some police officers call rent-a-mob. But they're actually joining forces with people who traditionally have been portrayed in the media as the great unwashed, people who just demonstrate for the sake of it. And so, this is the sign, it seems to me, of quite a significant movement that's taking place in Britain. How long it will last, we don't know, but politicians will ignore it at their peril.
There's nothing new about protest itself. People have always taken to the streets in an attempt to influence government policy. But it's difficult to get a clear picture of just how effective they've been. Are so many today disillusioned with the democratic process?
I think the arrogance of an elected politician who believes that once every 5 years, once they've got the vote in the ballot box, that they are then the representative from whatever political party, I think people don't accept. And also people are not prepared to accept compromise. They're bored with the compromises, the trade-offs, the lack of real feeling, the real emotion about the issues that they care terribly about. And so they're just saying, well, we'll do it, and we'll set that agenda, and we'll get out into the streets, and we'll write, we'll take part in public inquiries, and we'll join groups like Friends of the Earth, and do something for ourselves.
Campaign groups are now harnessing the tools of the business world to make direct action more effective. Sophisticated computer networks let them communicate with each other, and so too does video technology.
operating from the unlikely base of this suburban Oxford street is an alternative news network called Small World. They give camcorders to environmental activists around the country and compile the footage on video to distribute the sort of news they say the mainstream media ignore.
That's the soul. Right, that's the soul.
The issues are important, but what's important about the issues is the way that they're covered by other people. I mean, they're not covered in what we perceive to be an accurate way by mainstream media. It's important that people reclaim the media and start making news for themselves. And that's what Small World does, and that's what Undercurrents is about.
Obviously, I'd very much like you to come down now.
This might revolutionize the way that media covers events. And I think my hope is that it'll open it up and make it more democratic and more dependent on actually being there and being on the ground.
Top of the bill on the next Undercurrents video will be the M77 protest.
Pollok is part of a larger picture. So it's not just a 7-mile stretch of road in Glasgow. It's 7 miles there, 5 miles here, 10 miles there. It is road schemes all over the country, and slowly, bit by bit, we're eating up the last little green islands, especially in urban areas.
The nationwide fight against road building requires nationwide communication. Groups such as Road Alert and Alarm UK use email to keep activists like Kerry informed of new direct action protests. If colleagues in another part of the country need help, the system works quickly. Reinforcements can be on the scene within hours.
If one of our groups has been unsuccessful in stopping a road before a public inquiry or after it, and they wish to take direct action when the bulldozers are coming in, we will support quite openly and quite fully non-violent direct action.
At Pollok 2 weeks ago, the contractors cleared the remaining trees in the path of the M77. The camp remains, for now, but hasn't the campaign to stop the motorway been a failure?
Direct action works. Now, it might not work for one particular tree or for one particular issue, but what it does is, by doing this, you get this into the public consciousness, and we're raising consciousness by doing this. Now, they've been very successful in America and Canada and down south where people have done this, and I've been involved in that to a certain extent.
Lessons learned from other campaigns have been put to good effect here. The camp is well fortified in case Wimpy should choose to invade. Ropes connect each tree to make it more difficult to fell them. The protesters are staying in the camp to continue their direct action against the road and will switch to new tactics. But ultimately they know it's a DIY defence and a one-sided battle.
Yeah, I mean, they've got £53 million and we've only got our gyros, so it's a bit of a David and Goliath battle. But when you're stopping a £53 million operation for a couple of weeks, that's costing them thousands and thousands of pounds, which, even if it doesn't stop the road, is coming out of Wimpy's corporate profits, which is something that we'd be very proud of achieving.
The protesters haven't slain any corporate giants yet, but they have claimed a ministerial casualty. Alan Stewart resigned after a confrontation at the camp.
In a democracy, decisions have to be taken. Decisions on major road projects, as this one is, are never going to be satisfactory to 100% of the people. Now, I do not in any way doubt the legitimate right of peaceful protest, but in a democracy the majority has rights too. What has been happening is that a small minority have been trying to project themselves as the people with all the democratic rights. That's nonsense.
Direct action really works. It works in two ways. Either it stops in its tracks what people are trying to do, it forces a reappraisal. That's in the short term, but in the longer term it sets the agenda, and politicians can't ignore direct action. And so we've seen time and time again that when people finally say enough is enough, I'm going to get out there in the streets and do something about it, then direct action sets the agenda. What then happens, of course, is then politicians then take it back. Ultimately, they have to, because they're the decision takers. They'll never concede that the direct action was the reason why they changed their mind. But we all know that they did. You know, we know that they are affected by the direct action, and they've had to respond to it.
Protests act as a magnet for all sorts of fringe groups who view demonstrations as fertile recruiting ground. A worry to some activists.
These fringe groups do seem to have latched on. Many of them have no record to speak of interest in environmental issues, in animals' rights issues, or in roads issues. And I worry that they will try to dominate what has so far been a non-violent movement.
Do you think some of them are in it to cause trouble?
I suspect some of them are. And whenever this movement gives into violence, then we're going to lose its unity. Then we're going to lose the middle classes.
An unusual new feature of the Pollok campaign has been the involvement, engineered or otherwise, of local school children.
And I don't think we should build the M77 here because we want to save the trees.
Controlling the young protesters at Pollok has created a new headache for the police. And on other demonstrations like Twyford Down, policing the diverse range of protesters, from New Age traveller to suburban housewife, has created problems too.
Undoubtedly, the spate of protests and demonstrations in the last few years, and particularly in the last few months, have presented very real problems for the police. In some cases, in the M77, the media and the police can present some of the demonstrators as, you know, the great unwashed, as rent-a-mob or whatever. But that certainly isn't true of all of them by a long way. And it's even less true of some of the protests elsewhere in England about the export of animals and these sort of issues. The police are actually finding that they're up against people, in some cases, have never demonstrated before in their lives.
Mum, we're going to go all the way.
Ironically, it's this new breed of protester, not the anarchist preaching class warfare, which presents the police with the greatest challenge.
Educated people of whatever level in society they are, if they're articulate and aware of their rights, then clearly they're entitled to exercise those rights as effectively as they can. And I suppose, in that regard, that creates a greater difficulty for us, because if you have a large number of people aware of their rights and choosing to exercise them at the same time, we have to deploy our resources accordingly.
You don't move, you'll be arrested.
We'll probably have an increase in public order problems, or more precisely, public disorder problems. And I think that with improved communications and the fact that people are much more readily aware of issues, the likelihood, in my view, and some of my colleagues, is that we're probably going to get more public order situations arising during the course of the next decade.
It may well be that the M77 will be built, despite all the protests and opposition, but that the next motorway that they were intending to build in Scotland may not get built. Maybe the government will say it's just too much bother, or we've got to find another solution. And so, given hundreds of years of protest in Britain, protest, demonstrations, direct action is part and parcel of our heritage and part and parcel of the way we do things. It's part and parcel of the way that ordinary people send warning signals to government, saying we've had enough, we don't like it, we're not prepared to go on.
We'd like to be absolutely successful and stop the road. I don't know whether that's going to happen. If that does happen, that they do build the road, people will go away from here with skills and passion and motivation to work on other issues. So it has been very successful. It's a starting point from which lots of big things are going to grow.
Later this evening, we're invited to join Kirsty Walk and Brian Taylor as they monitor the results and invite analysis and debate on the Scottish local elections. That's an election special at 11:30 here on BBC Scotland on 1. Now on 1, the 9 o'clock news with Michael Burke.
Last-minute appeals for clemency for the Briton on death row in America have been turned down. No mercy for Nick Ingram. He's due to go to the electric chair in 3 hours. The man who studied neurology in jail to prove he didn't murder a little girl has been freed by the appeal court. And as the transatlantic fishing row gets worse, Britain has blocked European moves against Canada. Good evening. After 12 years on death row in Jackson, Georgia, the Briton Nick Ingram is now 3 hours away from execution in the electric chair. Last appeals for mercy, including one today from the Archbishop of Canterbury, have been turned down. His lawyers are continuing to raise the case in courts across the country, but admit there's now very little chance of a stay of execution. Ingram was convicted in 1983 of the cold-blooded shooting of a middle-aged couple he had robbed.
While there remain a few possible court manoeuvres, the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles was Nicholas Ingram's greatest hope of having his death sentence for murder commuted to life in prison. And after highly emotional hearings, the 5 grim-faced men pronounced their verdict.
Based on a unanimous decision this morning by the State Board of Pardons and Parole, the petition for commutation has been denied.
The board chairman took the extraordinary step of visiting Ingram on death row at what's called the Georgia Diagnostic Centre, the prison where he's held. An intervention by the British government would not have made any difference, the board said, though they did actively seek the views of the victims of the crime, talking to Mrs. Sawyer, the widow of the man Ingram murdered, and referring to her suffering.